Have you ever been judged unfairly the second you walked into a room? We've all felt it, that sting of being underestimated. But what happens when that judgment is directed at a woman who holds the power to shut down an entire industry with a single phone call? This isn't a story about a simple misunderstanding at an airport. It's the story of a black CEO, a so-called VIP, who demanded her seat, and the catastrophic chain of events that unfolded when they picked the wrong person to bully. Stay with me, because the karma that comes back in this story isn't just a gentle tap on the shoulder. It's a financial and social hurricane that changes lives forever. The Sterling wing of the Van Nuys private airport was designed to be an oasis of calm, a hushed cathedral for the modern titans of industry. The air, smelling faintly of expensive leather and freshly brewed Sumatran coffee, was a filter against the chaos of Los Angeles. Plush, low-slung armchairs were arranged in discreet islands on a sea of hand-knotted wool carpet. Here conversations were murmured, and fortunes were decided with the quiet tap of a finger on a tablet screen. Dr. Serafina Jordan sat in one of those armchairs, a picture of unassuming elegance. She wore no logos. Her attire consisted of a simple but impeccably tailored pair of charcoal grey trousers, a soft cashmere sweater in a deep aubergine, and comfortable yet stylish leather flats. Her hair was styled in intricate, elegant braids, a crown that framed a face with intelligent, observant eyes. On the small table beside her sat a worn paperback copy of a classic novel and a lukewarm cup of tea. She was engrossed in her book, a deliberate shield against the low thrum of entitlement that often permeated such spaces. For Serafina, this was a rare moment of anonymity. As the founder and CEO of Ethelred Aeronautics, one of the world's leading innovators in avionics software and logistical AI, her face was well known in boardrooms from Silicon Valley to Shanghai. Her company's tech was the silent, beating heart in thousands of commercial and private aircraft. But today she was just a passenger. She was flying to a quiet retreat in Aspen for a much-needed 4-day break, her first in over 2 years. She had intentionally booked the flight on Ethelred Executive Flights, a charter subsidiary she had acquired 3 years prior under her mother's maiden name, S. Williams, to gauge the unvarnished customer experience. The calm was abruptly shattered by the arrival of a couple who seemed to suck the very oxygen from the room. The man, Preston Holloway, was a walking billboard for new money. His jacket was a shade of electric blue that screamed for attention. His white sneakers were deliberately scuffed just so, and his watch was a chunk of rose gold, so large it looked like a beautiful, expensive handcuff. He spoke into his phone in a voice that was half shout, half brag, using terms like disrupting the paradigm and leveraging my brand equity. Clinging to his arm was a woman named Brittany, whose surgically perfected features were locked in a state of perpetual disdain. She was dressed in a designer tracksuit that likely cost more than the monthly salary of the lounge attendant she was currently sneering at for not having her preferred brand of almond milk. "I mean, seriously, Preston," Brittany whined, her voice cutting through the hushed ambience like a shard of glass. "This place is so basic. And look at the people here. I thought this was supposed to be exclusive." Her eyes swept the room, pausing for a fraction of a second on Serafina, a flicker of dismissal in her gaze before moving on. Serafina didn't react. She simply turned a page in her book, her mind cataloguing the interaction as a data point. Customer experience. Note lounge atmosphere compromised by loud, disruptive clients. Staff appears intimidated. Preston finally ended his call with a booming, "Just wire the crypto, bro. It's a lock." He then clapped his hands together, surveying the lounge as if he owned it. "All right, babe. Let's find a seat. We've got to be fresh for the Aspen Gala tonight. I need to be seen with Klaus." They chose a seating area directly across from Serafina, their loud conversation a constant grating noise. They complained about the champagne selection, the speed of the Wi-Fi, and the general lack of deference from the staff. Serafina tried to tune them out, focusing on the printed words before her, but it was difficult. They were a performance, and the entire lounge was their unwilling audience. An hour later, a gate agent with a frazzled expression and a name tag that read Brenda approached the center of the room. Her voice was tight with anxiety. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? We have a slight issue with flight 7 Oahu to Aspen." A collective sigh went through the lounge. Private jet travel was supposed to be immune to the mundane problems of commercial flights. Brenda continued, her eyes scanning a tablet. "Due to an unexpected aircraft maintenance issue, we had to swap to a smaller jet, a Gulfstream G550. Unfortunately, this means we have one less seat than originally ticketed passengers. We are in an oversold situation." Preston Holloway immediately shot to his feet. "Unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable. Do you have any idea who I am?" Brenda flinched. "Sir, we understand your frustration. We are prepared to offer a significant travel credit and a seat on the first flight tomorrow morning to any passenger willing to volunteer." Silence. No one in this lounge was interested in a travel credit. Their time was their most valuable asset. Brenda's eyes scanned the room, a bead of sweat forming on her temple. Her gaze flickered past a renowned surgeon, a quiet real estate mogul, and landed with a sense of unfortunate relief on the unassuming woman reading a book. She saw the simple clothes, the lack of flashy jewelry, the absence of an entourage. She made a calculation based on 1,000 unconscious biases. This one seemed the least important, the most pliable. She walked over to Serafina, her footsteps echoing in the now silent room. "Ma'am," she began, her voice a mixture of false sympathy and authority. "I'm going to need your cooperation here." Serafina slowly lowered her book, her calm gaze meeting Brenda's nervous one. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice even and low. "As I explained," Brenda said, gesturing vaguely, "we have a seating issue. Mr. Holloway here," she nodded towards Preston, who was now puffing out his chest, "is a priority VIP client. Given the circumstances, we're going to have to bump you to the flight tomorrow." It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. Serafina's expression didn't change, but inside a switch was flipped. The anonymous passenger, S. Williams, receded, and Dr. Serafina Jordan, CEO of Ethelred Aeronautics, took her place. The audit had just begun. "I see," Serafina said, her voice dangerously quiet. "And on what basis was that decision made?" The storm had arrived. The air in the lounge grew thick and heavy. Every eye was now fixed on the quiet woman in the aubergine sweater and the increasingly stressed gate agent. Brenda had expected compliance, perhaps a bit of grumbling, but not this direct analytical question. "Well, ma'am," Brenda stammered, thrown off balance. "It's a standard procedure. We have to prioritize our most valued clients." "And Mr. Holloway is your most valued client?" Serafina asked, her gaze unwavering. "May I ask what metric you're using to determine that? Is it frequency of travel, total revenue generated, or is it based on the volume of his voice?" A few suppressed snickers rippled through the lounge. The surgeon across the room subtly lowered his newspaper to get a better view. Preston Holloway strode forward, his expensive sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. He loomed over Serafina, attempting to use his physical presence to intimidate. "Look, lady, I don't know who you think you are, but I have a 7-figure crypto deal to close in Aspen. My time is literally money. Your time is..." Well, clearly you're just reading a book. Brittany trailed behind him, a smirk playing on her lips. She probably got her ticket with airline miles. She whispered to Preston just loud enough for everyone to hear. Just get her out of here. She's holding everything up. Serafina ignored them completely. Her focus remained locked on Brenda. Brenda, she said, reading the name tag with deliberate emphasis. Let me rephrase my question. On whose authority are you removing a ticketed confirmed passenger from this flight, against her will? Brenda's face flushed a deep crimson. This was spiraling out of her control. She was just following the unofficial but deeply ingrained rule, appease the loudest, wealthiest-looking person. It's company policy. The station manager can confirm. Then please get your station manager, Serafina replied coolly. She folded her hands in her lap, a portrait of unnerving patience. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't stood up. She hadn't made a single threatening gesture. And yet she was dominating the entire confrontation. Her refusal was not emotional. It was clinical, a quiet dismantling of their flimsy authority. Preston scoffed in disbelief. Are you kidding me? You're going to make us wait for a manager for this? He gestured down at Serafina with a dismissive wave. This is why I usually fly with NetJets. They understand customer service. Serafina felt a sting of professional indignation at the mention of her biggest competitor. Customer experience, note client, threatening to switch to a competitor due to poor handling of a logistical issue. Staff is de-escalating improperly. Brenda, desperate, made one last appeal. Ma'am, please, we will provide you with a $5,000 travel voucher, a suite at the Fairmont for the night, and a complimentary dinner. It's a very generous offer. It's a generous offer to compensate for a breach of contract, Serafina corrected her gently. I have a ticket for flight 714 today. I have a seat assignment. I checked in. I have met all my obligations as a passenger. The failure is on the airline's end, not mine. Therefore, I will not be cooperating by surrendering my seat. The answer is no. Her no was not defiant or angry. It was a simple statement of fact, as final and immovable as a bedrock. It hung in the air, a challenge that no one in the room knew how to meet. Brittany, however, decided to try a different tactic, personal insult. Oh my God, who does she think she is? Look at her. The sweater is probably from a department store. She probably can't even afford the hotel you're offering her. Just call security and have her dragged out. She's probably never even seen the inside of a private jet before. Before Brenda could respond to that vile suggestion, a man in a slightly better-fitting but still rumpled suit bustled into the lounge. He had a harried look on his face and a Bluetooth earpiece that seemed to be a permanent fixture. Brenda, what's the hold-up? I've got Mr. Holloway's pilot screaming in my ear. This was the station manager, Mr. Peterson. Brenda looked at him with sheer relief. Mr. Peterson, thank goodness. This passenger, she pointed at Serafina, is refusing to give up her seat for Mr. Holloway. I've explained the situation and made her the compensation offer. Mr. Peterson's gaze fell upon Serafina. He saw what Brenda had seen, a black woman dressed simply sitting alone. His mind, like Brenda's, leapt to a series of swift, incorrect conclusions. He saw an obstacle, not a person of substance. He adopted a tone of patronizing condescension, the kind one uses with a difficult child. Ma'am, let's be reasonable here. This is a very simple situation. Mr. Holloway is a key client. He needs to be in Aspen tonight. You do not. We need you to take the offer and let us get on with our business. Serafina slowly raised an eyebrow. You're the station manager. I am, he said with an air of self-importance, and it is your professional judgment Serafina continued, her voice still perfectly level, that the best solution to a logistical failure on your airline's part is to forcibly remove a paying customer based on a subjective and discriminatory assessment of her importance relative to another passenger. Mr. Peterson's face tightened. The word discriminatory was a landmine. Now wait a minute. Nobody said anything about discrimination. This is about business priorities. It's just common sense. Common sense? Serafina repeated the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. She had spent 2 decades building a multi-billion-dollar enterprise on logic, data, and precision. To have her presence dismissed by something as flimsy as common sense was a profound insult, not just to her, but to the entire ethos of her company. Yes, common sense. Preston Holloway boomed, feeling emboldened by the manager's presence. My business versus her. Hobby. Now are you getting off the plane, or do we need to make this ugly? Serafina looked from Preston's smug face to Mr. Peterson's weak-willed one. She had given them a chance. She had asked questions. She had stated her position clearly. They had not listened. They had only escalated. She gave a small, almost imperceptible sigh. It was a sigh of disappointment. She had hoped for better from her own company. It seems, she said finally, rising to her feet, that you have all made your final decisions. She reached into her simple leather handbag, but it wasn't a wallet or an ID she pulled out. It was her phone. Mr. Peterson saw the phone and let out a sigh of exasperation, assuming she was about to record the incident to post on social media. Ma'am, that's really not necessary. Let's not make a scene. I have no intention of making a scene. Serafina replied, her voice acquiring a new edge, a razor-sharp quality that cut through his bluster. I'm making a business decision. Preston Holloway laughed out loud. A business decision? What business? A blog about discount travel. Brittany giggled beside him, a shrill, unpleasant sound. Serafina ignored them, her thumb moving deftly across the screen. She scrolled through her contacts, past world leaders, tech billionaires, and heads of state, until she found the name she was looking for, David Chen, COO. She pressed the call button. The entire time, her eyes never left Mr. Peterson's. He felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. There was a level of confidence radiating from her, an aura of absolute authority that his brain was struggling to reconcile with the visual information it was receiving. Her simple clothes, her quiet demeanor. It was all a deliberate camouflage for something he was beginning to realize he had catastrophically misjudged. The phone was answered on the first ring. Serafina, is everything all right? I thought you were supposed to be offline. David's voice was clear even through the speaker. Change of plans, David, Serafina said calmly. I'm at the Sterling wing at Van Nuys. I need you to do a few things for me immediately. Mr. Peterson's condescending smirk began to falter. The use of the name David Chen rang a distant bell. David Chen was the chief operating officer of Ethelred Aeronautics, a legendary figure in the industry, known for his ruthless efficiency. But that had to be a coincidence. First, Serafina continued, I want you to issue a code-red operational pause for all Ethelred executive flights operating out of the Pacific Standard Time Zone, effective immediately. Mr. Peterson's jaw went slack. A code-red operational pause was not a delay. It was a complete and total grounding of the fleet. It was an emergency measure reserved for catastrophic security threats or system-wide failures. It would cost millions of dollars in a matter of hours. Serafina, are you serious? David's voice was now laced with concern. What's happened? Is it a security breach? A fleet-wide software bug? You could call it a software bug. David, Serafina replied, her gaze still locked on the pale-faced station manager. A critical failure in the human systems interface? Brenda, the gate agent, looked like she was about to faint. Preston and Brittany had stopped snickering, a confused and uneasy silence falling over them. The other passengers in the lounge were now sitting upright, listening with rapt attention. This was no longer a simple seating dispute. It was a corporate power play of the highest order. "Ground the entire Western Fleet," Serafina commanded. "All flights. Cancelled. Inform passengers that it is due to an unscheduled mandatory fleet-wide service and protocol audit. No flights take off from any of our West Coast hubs until I personally give the clearance. Do you understand?" "Yes, of course. I'll execute it now," David said, without hesitation. He knew better than to question a direct order like that. Serafina never bluffed. "What's the second thing?" "I'm looking at a station manager here," Serafina said, her voice dropping to an icy calm. "His name is Peterson. He's about to receive a flood of notifications and calls from irate clients and pilots. When he inevitably calls the head office to figure out what's going on, I want you to patch him through directly to my extension." Mr. Peterson felt the blood drain from his face. It was happening. It was real. "And finally, David," Serafina said, "pull up the client profile for a Mr. Preston Holloway. He's booked on Flight 711. I want a full breakdown of his travel history spending and overall value to this company. Have it on my screen in 5 minutes." She then looked directly at Preston, a flicker of something cold and analytical in her eyes. "I'm curious to see the data on our most valued client." She ended the call. For a moment, there was absolute silence in the lounge. Then chaos erupted. Mr. Peterson's Bluetooth earpiece began blinking frantically. His personal cell phone started buzzing on his belt clip. Brenda's tablet pinged with a series of urgent red-flagged notifications. Out on the tarmac, the distinct sound of a jet engine spooling down could be heard. "What? What did you do?" Peterson stammered, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Preston Holloway finally found his voice, though it was now laced with uncertainty. "This is a joke, right? This is some kind of crazy stunt. You can't just cancel flights." Serafina slipped her phone back into her handbag. She looked at the three of them, Preston, Brittany, and Mr. Peterson, not with anger, but with a kind of detached pity, the way a scientist might look at a failed experiment. "I can," she said simply. "And I have." She then walked over to the coffee station, poured herself a fresh cup of tea, and returned to her seat. She picked up her paperback novel, as if nothing had happened. Mr. Peterson's phone rang a shrill, panicked sound. He fumbled to answer it. "Hello. What do you mean? Grounded all of them by whose authority?" He listened for a moment, his eyes widening in terror. His gaze darted over to the calm woman reading her book. "Whose authority?" he squeaked into the phone. "The authority of Ethelred Actual." He didn't understand the term, but it was clear the person on the other end did. He listened for another few seconds, his face turning a shade of grey that matched Serafina's trousers. He slowly lowered the phone. He looked at Serafina, his mind finally putting all the pieces together: the impossible command, the COO's instant obedience, the call sign Ethelred Actual, a designation reserved for one person and one person only. "You," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You're Dr. Jordan. You're Serafina Jordan." The name dropped into the silent room like a 10-ton weight. The real estate mogul gasped. The surgeon's eyes went wide. Everyone knew that name. Ethelred Aeronautics was not just a company. It was an empire. And they had just tried to bully the Empress. The revelation of Serafina's identity didn't just change the atmosphere in the room. It inverted the entire power dynamic with the force of a tectonic shift. Mr. Peterson looked as if he'd seen a ghost, his bravado evaporating into a puddle of cold sweat. Brenda the gate agent leaned against a wall for support, her face ashen. But the most dramatic reaction came from Preston and Brittany. Preston's jaw, which had been set in a pugnacious jut just minutes before, now hung open in slack-jawed horror. He was a man who built his entire persona on proximity to power and influence, and he had just spent the last half hour insulting and trying to intimidate one of the most powerful women in the tech and aviation industries. Brittany, for her part, simply froze, her carefully constructed mask of disdain cracking to reveal raw panic. The name Seraphina Jordan was one she knew from the glossy pages of Forbes and Fortune, a symbol of the very elite she so desperately aspired to be a part of. The woman she had dismissed as a frumpy department store clad, nobody was in fact the gatekeeper to the world she craved. Seraphina took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea, letting the silence stretch, allowing the full weight of their mistake to settle upon them. She was no longer just a passenger. She was a living embodiment of their catastrophic error in judgment. Finally, Mr. Peterson stumbled forward, his hands clasped in front of him in a desperate plea. "Dr. Jordan, I am so profoundly sorry. I had no idea. It was a complete misunderstanding. Please, Seraphina held up a hand, and he fell silent instantly. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice calm but devoid of any warmth. "It was not a misunderstanding. It was a choice. You and your staff made a series of choices based on a set of flawed assumptions. You assumed my value based on my appearance. You assumed Mr. Holloway's importance based on his volume. You chose to inconvenience the person you perceived as the weakest. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a failure of policy of training and of basic human decency." Her phone pinged softly. She glanced at the screen. David has sent Mr. Holloway's file. She looked directly at Preston, whose face was now slick with perspiration. "It's fascinating reading. In the last 3 years you have flown with Ethelred executive flights, a total of 4 times. 2 of which were booked using a corporate discount code from a company you left 6 months ago. Your total net revenue contributed to this company is less than what it costs to de-ice a jet's wings in a mild frost." She paused, letting the humiliation sink in. "Conversely, the gentleman you cut in front of at the security check," she nodded subtly towards the quiet real estate mogul, "is Mr. Chenoweth, whose portfolio includes the private hangars we lease at 3 major airports. The surgeon over there, Dr. Albright, is on our board of medical advisors for our Medevac program. You, Mr. Holloway, are not a VIP. You are barely a customer." Preston Holloway was speechless. His entire fabricated world was being dismantled, piece by piece, by quiet, indisputable data. Seraphina then turned her attention back to Mr. Peterson. "The grounding of the fleet was not an act of pique, Mr. Peterson. It is a necessary measure. If this is the level of service and judgment at your flagship private terminal, I have to assume the cancer of incompetence runs deeper. We will conduct a full audit. Every protocol will be reviewed. Every staff member will be re-evaluated. We will tear down the system you have been operating under and rebuild it from scratch. A system based on integrity and respect, not on sycophancy and prejudice." Just then, 2 uniformed security officers entered the lounge. They did not move with aggression, but with a quiet, professional purpose. They did not look at Seraphina. They went straight to Mr. Peterson. "Sir," the lead officer said, "we've been instructed that you are to hand over your airport credentials and be escorted from the premises. Your employment has been terminated." Mr. Peterson stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He looked at Seraphina, his eyes begging for a reprieve she had no intention of granting. He had reached the point of no return and had now fallen off the cliff. Without a word, he unclipped his ID badge and handed it over. The officers led him away his career in executive aviation, ending not with a bang, but with a quiet, humiliating walk past the very people he had failed to serve. Next, Serafina looked at Brenda, who began to tremble. "Ms. Miller," Serafina said, having clearly learned her full name from the file on her phone. "Your actions were a direct result of the poor leadership and toxic culture Mr. Peterson fostered. However, you also made a choice. You targeted a passenger based on bias. That is inexcusable." She paused. "You will be placed on administrative leave pending a full review. I suggest you use that time to reflect on what it truly means to provide service." Brenda nodded, numbly tears welling in her eyes, and walked shakily towards the staff exit. Finally, Serafina's gaze settled on Preston and Brittany. They looked like cornered animals. "As for you, Mr. Holloway," she said, her voice like ice. "Your flight to Aspen is of course cancelled. All your future booking privileges with Ethelred Executive Flights, and indeed any subsidiary of Ethelred Aeronautics, are hereby revoked, permanently." "You can't do that!" Brittany shrieked, her composure finally shattering. "We have to be at the gala. Preston knows people." Serafina gave her a look of utter indifference. "The gala will proceed without you, and the people Mr. Holloway knows will soon know him as the man who single-handedly grounded the entire Ethelred West Coast fleet because he couldn't bear the indignity of waiting his turn. I imagine that will be quite the conversation starter." She stood up, picking up her handbag and her book. Another staff member, a senior flight coordinator who had rushed to the scene, approached her timidly. "Dr. Jordan, your personal jet is being prepared. It will be ready in 15 minutes. We have your luggage." "Thank you," Serafina said. She looked around the chaotic lounge where other passengers were now on their phones, dealing with the fallout of the grounded fleet. She felt a pang of regret for their inconvenience, but knew the short-term pain was necessary for the long-term health of her company. As she walked towards the door leading to the tarmac, Preston Holloway made one last desperate gambit. "Wait," he cried out. "This is going to ruin me." "That deal? It was everything." Serafina paused at the doorway, her back to him. She didn't turn around. "Your ruin is a consequence of your own character, Mr. Holloway," she said without a trace of emotion. "You built a house of cards on a foundation of arrogance. You should not be surprised when a breath of truth blows it all down." And with that, she was gone, leaving behind a room full of shattered careers, ruined plans, and the deafening sound of karma being served. The immediate aftermath in the Sterling wing was a controlled implosion. As Serafina's personal Challenger 650 ascended into the California sky, the consequences of her decisive action began to cascade through the lives of those left on the ground. This was not a simple firing or a flight cancellation. It was a detonation, and the shrapnel hit everyone who had stood too close to the blast. For the other passengers, the inconvenience was real, but temporary. They were, after all, wealthy and resourceful individuals. Calls were made, other charters were scrambled, and schedules were rearranged. But their anger was not directed at Serafina Jordan. It was a focused, cold fury, aimed squarely at one person, Preston Holloway. Mr. Chenoweth, the real estate mogul, calmly walked over to where Preston was standing, dumbfounded. "Mr. Holloway." Chenoweth said, his voice dangerously soft. "Your little tantrum has just cost me a meeting in Aspen that was 9 months in the making. My company, which, as you heard, leases hangar space to Ethelred, will be having a very serious conversation with their executive team tomorrow. And I will make it my personal mission to ensure that everyone in my circle, and in the Aspen circle, you so desperately want to be a part of, knows that your name is synonymous with toxic immaturity. Dr. Albright the surgeon was next. I was flying to Aspen to consult on a complex pediatric surgery scheduled for 6 a.m. tomorrow. A child's life is now at risk because you couldn't handle being treated like a normal person for 5 minutes. I will get there by helicopter if I must. But understand this, the medical community is small. Your reputation will precede you. Preston and Brittany were suddenly social pariahs in the very environment they had tried to dominate. They were surrounded by the quiet, seething rage of genuinely powerful people whose lives they had disrupted. There was nowhere to hide, but the true life-altering karma was just beginning to spool up for the main players. For Mr. Peterson, being escorted out of the building was just the first step in his professional demise. The world of high-end executive aviation is incredibly small and built entirely on reputation. The story of him presiding over the incident that caused the Ethelred grounding spread through the industry like wildfire. By the time he got home, he had 2 missed calls from headhunters rescinding tentative offers for other positions. His name was blacklisted. He wasn't just fired, he was excommunicated. His condescending attitude and poor judgment had rendered him unemployable in the only field he knew. Within a year, he would be managing a regional rental car agency, a ghost haunting the periphery of the world he once inhabited. Brenda's fate was less severe, but equally transformative. During her administrative leave, she did exactly what Serafina had suggested, she reflected. She was horrified by her own actions, by how easily she had bowed to pressure and made a biased judgment call. She submitted a lengthy letter of resignation to Ethelred, including a sincere handwritten apology addressed to Dr. Jordan. She left the aviation industry entirely and retrained as a social worker, dedicating her life to helping people who were genuinely in need, a stark penance for the day she had tried to disenfranchise someone she wrongly perceived as powerless. The most spectacular downfall, however, was reserved for Preston Holloway. The crypto deal he was flying to Aspen to close was in reality a last-ditch effort to secure funding for his failing venture. The investors he was meeting were notoriously fickle, and punctuality and professionalism were paramount. When he called breathless and panicked to explain he would miss the dinner, his excuse sounded insane. I was kicked off the flight by the CEO of the airline, who then grounded the entire fleet because of me. It sounded like the lie of a desperate, unstable man. The investors, already wary of his flashy but unsubstantial persona, pulled out immediately. The deal was dead. The fallout didn't stop there. One of the other inconvenienced passengers was a senior journalist for a major financial publication. Intrigued by the drama, she started digging into Preston Holloway. Her investigation uncovered a mountain of debt, a history of failed startups, and a social media presence built on rented Lamborghinis and photoshopped vacations. The resulting article, titled "The Crypto King with No Clothes," went viral. It was a brutal, detailed exposé of his entire fraudulent existence. His lines of credit were cut, his so-called partners abandoned him, and his influencer status vanished overnight. Brittany was the first to go. Her allegiance had been to Preston's perceived status and wealth, not to the man himself. The moment the gold plating was stripped away to reveal the cheap metal underneath, she was gone. She left a simple note that read, "I can't be associated with this kind of failure," and was seen a week later on the arm of another, more stable-looking man. Preston lost everything. The rented penthouse, the leased sports car, the fake friendships. He was forced to move back into his parents' basement, a pariah in the world he had tried so desperately to conquer. His punishment wasn't just financial, It was existential. He had built his identity on a foundation of arrogance and illusion, and Dr. Serafina Jordan hadn't just taken his flight. She had taken his entire sense of self. The karma wasn't a single event. It was the slow, agonizing collapse of a life built on nothing. While the lives of Peterson, Brenda, and Holloway were imploding, Serafina Jordan was engaged in the opposite process construction. For her, the incident at Van Nuys was not a personal victory to be savored, but a critical diagnostic failure that required an immediate and thorough systemic overhaul. The grounding of the West Coast fleet, which lasted for a full 36 hours, was not a punishment. It was surgery. The day after the incident, instead of relaxing in Aspen, Serafina was in a secure conference room at Ethelred's headquarters, leading a crisis management meeting with her top executives. David Chen, her COO, had a detailed preliminary report ready. The financial hit from the grounding is approximately $4.98 million in lost revenue and compensation packages. David began, his tone grim. The reputational damage is harder to quantify, but it's significant. Serafina nodded, unfazed by the number. A necessary expense. The cost of rot is always higher. What we saw yesterday wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a corporate culture that has begun to value the perception of wealth over the reality of character. It's a disease, and we are going to cure it. Over the next 36 hours, Serafina spearheaded a complete teardown and rebuild of Ethelred Executive Flight's customer service and operational protocols. First, she personally drafted what came to be known as the Jordan Mandate. It was a new company-wide prime directive. It stated in no uncertain terms that all passengers were to be treated with the same high level of respect and service, regardless of their public profile, their attire, or their perceived status. It stipulated that in any conflict or logistical issue, solutions could never involve the non-consensual removal of a confirmed passenger. The mandate was clear. We solve our problems. We do not make our customers our problems. Second, she commissioned a complete overhaul of their employee training program. She brought in a leading DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting firm, not for a one-day seminar of corporate jargon, but to fundamentally redesign their recruitment onboarding and continuous education processes. The new training modules included rigorous scenario-based testing on unconscious bias, conflict de-escalation, and equitable problem-solving. Every single employee, from the baggage handlers to the senior VPs, was required to complete and pass the new certification within 90 days. Third, she implemented a new system for identifying valued clients. The old informal system that allowed loud personalities like Preston Holloway to be perceived as VIPs was scrapped. In its place, a data-driven system, managed by the new Client Integrity Office, DAO, was created. It evaluated clients based on concrete metrics, flight history adherence to conduct policies, and overall revenue contribution. Loyalty and character were now codified as assets. Quiet, long-term clients like Mr. Chenoweth and Dr. Albright were now flagged with the highest priority, ensuring they would always receive the deference they had earned, but never demanded. Finally, she made a series of public and private gestures to address the damage. She personally called every single passenger affected by the grounding, including Mr. Chenoweth and Dr. Albright, to apologize for the disruption. She didn't make excuses. She explained precisely what had happened and detailed the steps she was taking to ensure it would never happen again. Her transparency and decisive action turned a potential PR disaster into a masterclass in corporate accountability. Most of the clients, impressed by her directness, became even more loyal to the Ethelred brand. She also reviewed Brenda Miller's case, She read the heartfelt letter of resignation and apology. Seeing the genuine remorse and the steps Brenda was taking to change her life, Serafina instructed her HR department to do something unusual. They were to release a statement to any future employer of Brenda's, confirming she left Ethelred in good standing and had shown remarkable personal accountability in a difficult situation. It was a small act of grace, a recognition that people could learn from their mistakes. It would not save Brenda's aviation career, which she no longer wanted, but it would give her a clean slate to build her new life. In the end, the Van Nuys incident became a legendary case study within Ethelred Aeronautics. It was a painful, expensive, but ultimately transformative moment. Serafina had taken a shocking failure in her own system and used it as a catalyst to make the entire organization stronger, more equitable, and more resilient. She proved that true leadership wasn't about avoiding problems, but about how you respond to them. She hadn't just cancelled a few flights. She had reset the entire moral and operational compass of her company. 1 month later, the world felt different. Serafina Jordan sat on the expansive cedar deck of a secluded mountain lodge in Aspen, a location chosen for its splendid isolation. The air, thin and sharp at 9,000 feet, carried the clean, resinous scent of pine and the faintest hint of distant snow. Before her, the maroon bells stood like jagged sentinels, their peaks painted in the soft hues of an early autumn sunrise. A thick, cream-colored cashmere blanket was draped over her legs, and a steaming mug of Ceylon tea warmed her hands. This was the peace she had sought a month ago, a quiet, profound stillness that stood in stark contrast to the sterile, tension-filled atmosphere of the Van Nuys lounge. She had spent the last 3 days completely unplugged, hiking through golden aspen groves and reading by a crackling fire. For the first time in years, the constant hum of corporate responsibility had faded to a whisper. She was not Dr. Jordan, CEO. She was just Serafina, a woman alone with the mountains. She had allowed herself 1 hour of connectivity this morning before disappearing back into her solitude. As her satellite internet connection came to life, a handful of notifications populated her screen. An email caught her eye. The sender was Dr. Anya Albright. Serafina's finger hovered over the message before opening it. Subject: a note of thanks. Dear Dr. Jordan, I hope this message finds you well. I was one of the other passengers in the Van Nuys lounge last month, and I felt compelled to write to you. First, I wanted you to know that I made it to Aspen in time, and the pediatric surgery was a success. The young patient is now on the road to a full recovery. Second, I wanted to thank you. Not for the inconvenience, of course, but for your response to it. I flew back to Los Angeles on an Ethelred flight yesterday. The experience was different. The staff was professional, courteous, and attentive in a way that felt deeper than rote training. There was a sense of calm confidence, of genuine pride in their work. When a minor issue arose with another passenger's luggage, it was handled with such quiet, efficient grace that it was resolved before it could escalate. What you did was more than a corporate reshuffle. You performed a cultural transplant. Your actions that day were a profound lesson in leadership. Thank you for reminding us that integrity is the most valuable asset of all. Sincerely, Dr. Anya Albright. Serafina read the email twice, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the tea. The successful surgery was a welcome relief, a loose thread of anxiety she hadn't realized she was carrying. But it was the doctor's observation about the culture that truly resonated. It was one thing to see positive data on a spreadsheet. It was another to hear it described so eloquently by a discerning customer. The surgery had been successful. Just then, her tablet chimed with an incoming video call. The screen showed the smiling face of her COO, David Chen. She answered, propping the tablet against her knee. "Judging by that background, you finally made it to your vacation," David said, his voice cheerful. "I promise not to take more than 10 minutes of your mountain air." "It's fine, David. I was just catching up," she replied, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "I trust the sky hasn't fallen in my absence." "Quite the opposite. It's flying more smoothly than ever," he said. "The Q3 performance reports for Ethelred Executive are in, and they're fascinating. After the expected 2-day dip following the grounding, we've seen a sustained 18% increase in bookings from our top 2 tiers of corporate and high-value clients. Client retention is at an all-time high of 98%. And the feedback from the new training modules. Serafina asked her CEO mind, instinctively probing deeper than the balance sheet. "Are people just ticking the boxes, or is it sinking in?" "It's sinking in," David affirmed. "We had an incident last week at the Teterboro hub. A new client, a tech billionaire known for being temperamental, was furious his preferred catering wasn't available. Instead of escalating or capitulating, the junior gate agent calmly validated his frustration, clearly explained the supply chain reason, and had 3 alternative high-end options sourced and presented to him within 10 minutes. The client was so impressed by the grace under pressure that he sent a commendation letter. 2 years ago, that agent would have just given him a voucher and hidden in the back. That's your culture change in action." Serafina nodded, genuinely pleased. This was the real return on her investment. Not the 18% booking increase, but the empowerment of an employee to solve a problem with dignity. "There is one more thing," David said, a wry grin spreading across his face. "The final echo from the Holloway affair. We got a query from a third-party logistics company we use for shipping aircraft parts. They were running a final background check on a promising candidate for a warehouse coordinator position." "Don't tell me," Serafina said, already knowing the answer. "Yup, Preston Holloway. The system flagged his name instantly. The check came back with a big red No Service designation linked to our corporate parentage. Our contract with the logistics firm gives us the right to refuse any of their employees access to our facilities or assets. They, of course, immediately rescinded the job offer. They can't have a warehouse coordinator who is permanently banned from the premises of their biggest client." Serafina was silent for a moment, picturing the scene. There was no triumph in this, no joy in another's complete downfall. It was simply the cold, logical conclusion of a sequence of events he himself had initiated. His name was now a piece of data, a flag in a system that would follow him, silently closing doors he didn't even know he was about to knock on. The karma wasn't a lightning bolt from the heavens, it was a line of code in a database impartial, unyielding, and eternal. "The system worked as designed," she said, finally, her voice neutral. "Thank you for the update, David. Enjoy your weekend." She ended the call and looked back out at the mountains. She thought about the woman she had been in the lounge that day, the unassuming S. Williams. That identity had been a test, an experiment to see her company not through the polished lens of a CEO, but through the vulnerable eyes of a customer. The results had been more damning than she could have imagined. They had not seen a customer or even a person. They had seen a target, an obstacle to be removed for the convenience of someone louder and shinier. The decision to ground the fleet had weighed on her. It was a brutal, sweeping act that had caused collateral damage to people like Dr. Albright. But it had been necessary. A cancer cannot be negotiated with. It must be excised. A system that ran on the unstable, flammable fuel of human bias was as dangerous as a faulty engine. Her entire empire was built on the principles of precision data and the elimination of catastrophic variables. She had discovered the most dangerous variable of all was thriving in her own front office prejudice. Her response had not been an act of revenge. Revenge is emotional and personal. Her actions had been systemic and impersonal. She had simply held up a mirror reflecting the character of Peterson and Holloway, back at them with such force that their fragile worlds shattered against their own reflections. She had not been their punishment. She had been the consequence. A gentle breeze rustled the aspen trees down the slope, their golden leaves shimmering like 1,000 tiny coins. The sun was higher now, its warmth chasing the last of the morning chill from her skin. The audit of S. Williams was complete. The company was stronger, its purpose clearer, its engine running cleaner than ever before. And Dr. Serafina Jordan, leader of an empire, finally felt the profound, quiet satisfaction of a difficult job well done. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath of the pure mountain air, and for the first time in a very long time felt truly at peace. And there you have it, a story that shows what happens when arrogance collides with quiet, unshakable power. Doctor, Serafina Jordan didn't need to shout or scream to prove her point. Her power wasn't in her voice, but in the empire she had built and the integrity she refused to compromise. Preston Holloway, Mr. Peterson and Brittany learned the hard way that the person you underestimate is often the one who holds all the cards. Their story is a powerful reminder that true status isn't about the watch on your wrist or the logo on your clothes. It's about your character, and karma ensures that character is always eventually revealed. If you found this story of justice as satisfying as I did, please hit that like button to let me know. Share this video with someone who would appreciate a good karma story, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next tale. What did you think of Serafina's response? Let me know in the comments below.